When you stand up, when you turn off the noise, when you lift me up, you open the door. And I believe. I believe in running out and jumping in. I believe in swinging and sliding. I believe that boxes can fly. I believe in dancing and jumping and hiding and seeking. I believe that you are it. I believe in who can throw the farthest, jump the highest, run the fastest. I believe in Sock, Miss Mary Mac, and Bubbles. Sometimes I fall down, but I get back up because I believe in skin knees. I believe in laughing and the high five. I believe in courage and adventure. I believe in you look at me, you see what I can be, you open the door. And I believe in play.
Active play, in all of its forms, can transform how children live and grow, building muscles, expanding minds, making friends. Children need a balance of all types of active play every day to thrive. Help us give all kids the childhood they deserve.
I'm going to talk a little bit about why I do what I do, and then how we've built KaBOOM, but more importantly, what I think we need to do differently actually to try to give all kids the childhood that they deserve. I do what I do because when I was 2 years old, my father, who was a cross-country truck driver, and after the birth of my youngest sister, the 8 of us Hammond kids, he went to unload a truck and never came back. And my mom, for as hard as she tried, had several nervous breakdowns. And at 4 years old, I was shipped 3,500 miles across the country from Idaho to a group home run by the men and women of the Moose. So I stand here, frankly, as a 14-year product of philanthropy, of charity, of a community giving me a bear hug, and having an opportunity to succeed, although my circumstances were less fortunate and I wasn't their direct son or child. When I dropped out of college, I was living on a couch in Washington, D.C., and read an article in the Washington Post about 2 young kids in 1995 who had crawled into an abandoned car just 2 miles from our U.S. Capitol on the other side of the river. And it was a heat wave, and they were escaping the sun to be in the shade and suffocated and died. Aisha was 4 years old, and her younger brother, Clendon, was 2 years old. And what struck me about the article was several things. One, those were the same age that I was when my father left my family and when I went to the group home. And I looked at the parallel paths that I was able to travel, and they weren't going to have the opportunity. The second part of that story was the reporter from the Washington Post had actually seen this in a blurb in the Metro section, almost buried, as if it was not real news. And she went down to the community, and she literally spent 3 weeks going block by block by block to say, if they hadn't crawled in the Trans Am, to play dolls, where would they have played? And she couldn't find a park, a swimming pool, a basketball court, a gymnasium, a field house, a playground within 3 miles of where these kids were at. And she wrote this glaring front page headline that said, "No place to play." And so I didn't start out to actually start an organization or to do what I'm doing now. I simply went down to Anacostia in Livingston Manor to try to build one playground for myself to try to give Aisha and Clendon the childhood that they deserved. In 18 years, as Tina talked about, we're very fortunate to have built. On Monday, I was in Dallas, Texas for our 2,416th. And the model is pretty basic. We find deserving communities across the country that are generally non-public agencies like battered women's shelters, hospitals, boys and girls clubs, YMCAs, Salvation Armies, people who are caring for all kids, not just some kids, and try to, in the way we build playgrounds, bring about the artistry of kids. So all the playgrounds start with a design day where the kids talk about their dreams, their hopes, their aspirations, which is surprising for some of these kids, they don't get asked that very much. And they draw, and they draw what they want their park to be. And it's amazing that sometimes kids actually have to ask us, what is a playground? And we ask them to sit back to back and communicate with the kid behind them about what their favorite thing on a playground is, and sometimes they can't say it because they've never been to one. The park we built in Dallas on Monday was at a Salvation Army that's an 80-year-old facility that's never had a playground. I do what I do because we have a crisis in this country, and it's pretty obvious and basic. All kids aren't succeeding. So KaBOOM, as an organization, is a manifestation of bringing people together to fight for something instead of fighting against something. And for the first 13 years, to be quite honest, we really were not about play at all. We were about community building, community organizers, getting people to fight for something, a definable project on a definable timeline. Watching these parks come together over months, but in literally a single day, thousands of volunteers coming together to construct what these kids started as their playground's dream. And then after that, seeing in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a single mother with 2 kids run for school board because she had found her civic voice and a way to participate, and she lost. And 4 years later, she ran for city council and won. Or in Orlando, Florida, with the street light getting fixed. In New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina, all these piles of debris and kids were playing on it, and we simply went down to Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, where a woman had reached out to us and said that she remembers when she was 9 years old, when Hurricane Camille had come through and devastated their town, and the town leaders never rebuilt their park. And for 34 years, she built this animosity up. And she didn't want the kids of Bay St. Louis today to have the same feeling that she did about the town leaders after Hurricane Katrina. So 100 days after Hurricane Katrina, on December 17th, we built a park in Bay St. Louis, which was pretty phenomenal. And we got criticized, believe it or not. We got criticized because there were people who were not in the Gulf Coast who thought that play was a luxury. And that who was going to come out on December 17th, a week before Christmas, because we were all consumed about our lives getting ready for Christmas the next week? When these people were driving 3 hours a day round trip to come back and muck out their house and then go to Jackson was the only place that had power. Our priorities were wrong. We woke up as actually the largest purchaser of playgrounds in the United States. And we said, how can we not just build community, places, how can we build better community in better places? So we went on this odyssey to say, how are kids playing on playgrounds, and how can we make them better? which led us to a partnership with David Rockwell, a New York designer and architect. And he noticed that his own 2 young kids would play with the box longer than they did the toy that was inside of it. And so he came up with this concept of loose parts and found parts. And he built these blue blocks that didn't make anything, but could make everything you wanted it to make. And actually, just across the river, we built an imagination playground at Burling Slip at the South Seaport Museum, which has actually become one of the most visited parks in New York City. It's the first park in New York City in 25 years that have rearranged what you New Yorkers have said has been your favorite park. And it's all based on the concept of letting kids choose what to do instead of the playground choosing how you used to use it. Those blue blocks are also mobile, so we've distributed them across the country to children's museums and schools and boys and girls clubs. And they start this conversation about what is the best type of play for kids. After I speak generally to parents group, the first question that I get asked is, just tell me the shortcut to what is the best type of play for kids. The best type of play for kids is all type of play for kids. It's a balanced approach. And that it's not good for the child to be playing the same sport 3 seasons instead of 3 different sports, 1 season each. Tom Ferry from ESPN wrote this book called Game On because when he got transferred from ABC Sports to ESPN, his family had to move from here in New York to Connecticut. And his 8-year-old daughter wanted to join the soccer club in Connecticut, and no team picked her because she had no previous experience and wasn't going to add any value to their hopes to getting to the championship. At 8 years old. The culture of youth sports, which he wrote about in his book, says that just a decade ago, we used to start playing sports, organized team sports, at about 8 years old. And we played till about 11 years old, and then numbers started to drop down at that age. People started to select out, which is natural, okay? Now, you know what it is? They start at 4 years old, they peak at 6 years old, and start dropping out. We're condensing childhood so much for kids that they're not getting the childhood that they deserve. So in asking this question about what is the best type of play, we went to the experts and we went and watched and observed kids. We went to parks all across the country, went to playgrounds all across the country. We sat in housing developments all across the country. And we basically came up with a couple of different insights. The first 2 things is that when you asked parents what they thought the value of play was for their kids, surprisingly, the number 1 answer was not that it was joyous, not that it was fun, not that it builds your body, not that it builds your brain. It de-stresses them. When we ask kids, why do you play? The second most frequented answer was, it de-stresses me. Makes me less anxious. Not that it's joyous, not that it's fun, but they know they're doing it because what their parents are doing it is that they need to be de-stressed. Particularly in low-income communities, we know the consequences of toxic stress on kids. Toxic stress doesn't enable them to sleep well, eat well. It doesn't enable them to have this empathetic feeling about others. It basically stunts their growth. Yet too many kids in our country are growing up with toxic stress and have no outlet for it. So the first insight for us was that this is a national imperative and it's urgent. It's not just nice that kids should play, it's absolutely necessary, and that they should start playing the day that they are born, not the day that they go to school. A lot of times we think that schools are going to solve our problems. And if we just get them old enough to get to school, that's where they're going to learn. That's where they're going to be physically active. It actually starts the day they're born. The second insight that we learned, which was really troubling, is that we separate kids by their zip code, where they're born. The rich and the poor, the white and the black and Hispanic and brown. And low-income kids across our country had disproportionate less access and low quality play opportunities compared to middle and upper income kids. Just listen to the facts. 1 in 5 kids live within access to a park. Yet you're 29 times more likely to be of healthy body weight if you do. And if we look at low-income kids, disproportionately, they have a higher body mass index than middle-income and higher-income kids. In Chicago, between 1998 and 2003, they built 500 playgrounds. And if you overlaid that on a map, most of those playgrounds were built in middle to upper-income communities, not the communities where kids could potentially benefit from it most. Portland, Oregon, interestingly, when they build and renovate new schools in the middle income and upper income communities, they always put recreational facilities in the spaces. When they did it in the lower income communities, their budget got cut. We don't give all kids the childhood that they deserve. So the first insight was toxic stress matters. The second insight is about all kids being able to succeed and providing equal quality and access to them. Now, the 3 other things where I think you all really can help us with, to be quite honest. And the first is what kids crave is social connection. They play because they want to play with their friends. They want to play with other people. And 87% of kids say the first time that they saw somebody who did not speak like them or look like them was on a playground, was at play. So we know it's this great equalizer. It's the melting pot that we all talk about. So we somehow have to figure out in the design of playgrounds and civic spaces where people are going to gather, how do we encourage social connection? So in the design of playgrounds, it may be instead of having a swing that can only put 1 child on it, can you have a swing that has 3 and 4 kids on it? That certainly could be played with by 1 kid, but is made better when you have more kids on it. I don't know. But what are other ways to encourage social interaction if that's indeed what kids are craving, instead of, because of safety and liability, having to put hoods on the slides so that kids can't walk back up it or multiple kids can't go down it at the same time. So we have to think differently because that's what kids are craving. The second thing, which was really interesting, is that kids really talk about creativity in a different way than us adults talk about creativity. When adults talk about creativity, we're really looking at the expression. What can you draw? What can you build? When kids talk about creativity, they want to talk about how muddy I can get. And the general perception is that the muddier a child is, the better their day was. But when we send kids to daycare and when we send kids to school, we literally want them to come back cleaned up so they can get on to their next activity without having to be washed up. And what kids really want is to get muddy, is to be dirty, is to be sweaty, and then do it with other kids. So as we talk about creativity in public spaces, how do we bring back this sense of time so that kids can just be kids, unstructured, freely chosen, intrinsically motivated, and sometimes just bored? Because if they're bored, that's where creativity really kicks in. They start to figure out what to do with their time. They start to intrinsically talk about what they need to do instead of somebody telling them what to do or having a whistle be blown so that they could go on to their next activity, instruction, or drill. The third and final insight along this lines, which I think is really interesting, is challenge. And again, we adults think about it as risk. Kids want risk. Kids really want is challenge. If you look at the rise of the amount of time that kids are spending on video games, and you sit down and ask them why, it's because it changes. They can't master it. Every time you turn around, you level up. You get a different opportunity. It's never the same. When we talk about play, there's no leveling up, there's no challenge, there's no mastery. You can watch a kid go around a playground once or twice, and then nothing changes about it and they don't want to do it again. But imagine if we didn't create mastery in a single setting, like including challenge by putting a 40-foot rolling log and pin it on the end so that it rolls, only suspended a couple inches off the ground. And then watch the kids go to it, recognize A, that it rolls, they can stand on it, they try to walk across it. Maybe they don't get across it the first time. Oh, they failed. But it wasn't that bad. And they go back to the same site again and they try to get across it. And they don't get across it. They failed. And they go back and do it again. And then they start to realize, I wonder if I can start on the other side. Will it be easier? And so they tried the other side. And they start and they fall off. And they do it again. And then maybe they go on to something else because they want to win at something, achieve something. But minutes later, they're back at that rolling log because they want to master it. They want to get better at it. And maybe they can't do it the first day that it's actually out there. Some it might take a week, some it might take a month, and others more. And once you start to master it, what actually becomes interesting is then they start to game it. They recognize that if you put water on it, it makes it slipperier, which increases the challenge. Or sometimes they even toggle with the bolts on the side to see if they can make it spin faster. But if you watch what has happened there, they're prototyping, they're learning, they're physically active, they're engaged. They're manipulating their environment instead of the environment manipulating them. So next year, as an organization, we really want to have a national conversation about what is the best type of play for kids. How do we provide it for everyone? How does it eliminate toxic stress? And then how do we incorporate these design pillars into a Playgrounds of the Future competition so that we can build not just more playgrounds, but better playgrounds? And the final insight that actually came out of that research was play happens everywhere, not just at the park. So how do we build playful communities so that kids and communities and adults can be more playful? How do we put Foursquare in our sidewalks? How do we have spontaneous games of dodgeball in our streets like we used to when cars would have to honk their horns and kids would be asked to move their hockey sticks off so that the car can go by? We don't see that much anymore. So how do we bring back this culture where this type of play becomes the norm, not the exception? Because when we do see it, we actually recognize it and we're nostalgic about it. But it's the exception instead of the norm. And then I think once we do that and changing the behavior of our play norm where we actually play in an active and balanced way, we can get to a society that protects and promotes it. So that when recess is being eliminated in 52% of school districts across the country, we have people who actually stand up and show up and do something about it. When it's lack of quality recess, we actually have people stand up and show up and do something about it. That's where we have a self-fulfilling prophecy of a culture that's both promoting and protecting play. When we design our communities so that everybody can not just live, but thrive. Not just work, but play. You know, here in New York, you're really fortunate because I think both Mayor Bloomberg, in my opinion, and the Parks and Recs Department has led one of the biggest renaissance in the United States when it comes to public space, civic space, gathering places. When it comes to not just building parks and playgrounds for kids, but building parks and playgrounds for communities to thrive. Not just building boring stuff, but taking risk to build exciting stuff. And what's happening here is actually starting to happen across the country. And when you look at where I think the future needs to go is like in Chicago, where Mayor Emanuel recognized that, okay, they built 500 playgrounds, but it wasn't built for all kids. We have 94 elementary schools that don't have parks and playgrounds, and even if they did, those schools are closed after school on weekends and during breaks. So instead of working harder, he started to work smarter. And in working smarter, after mapping all the play opportunities in the city of Chicago, he prioritized the schools. He did a joint use, a public policy tool, a joint use agreement to make sure that those schools can be open after school, on weekends, and during breaks instead of closed, which means from a design perspective, instead of building the park and playground close to the school, you built it further from the school because it's going to get used more actually not during the school hours than during the actual school hours. So instead of having two playgrounds in the same neighborhood, you had one playground that just happened to be at the school, but it was used by the broader community. And then he allocated hundreds of millions of dollars to the infrastructure. I think that's a pretty exciting example, frankly, that I think is following New York here. And I can't wait to see more communities starting to do that across the country. I'm really excited about the future because this is starting to get on the national agenda. And we need to keep it on the national agenda. And not only do we need to keep it on the national agenda, we need to focus it on that it builds better brains, it builds better bodies, and it's fun in the process of doing it. So next year, as we really get ready to rethink the playground of the future, the community of the future, I hope all of your ideas and insights will come to bear so that it makes a better place for kids, not just the same place for them. For us at KaBOOM, frankly, it's the next 18 years of our work. And it's not about building the biggest branded nonprofit organization. It's about the cause getting the credit for the work that we're doing and the people who are doing it than ourselves. And I could stood up here and told you about the first Ben & Jerry's ice cream flavor ever given to a nonprofit organization was KaBerry KaBOOM, a blueberry strawberry ice cream with white fudge covered Pop Rocks. I could have talked about our $265 million public-private partnerships that we've struck as a fee for service to fund our own mission and organization instead of donations and philanthropy. Or I could have talked about 7 years ago the fact that we were a one-to-one model and we had all of this great intellectual property that the demand was greater than what we can fulfill, and we opened it up online, free to anybody who wanted to use it across the country. And for every one playground that we've built, this online tool has actually enabled 9 other playgrounds for communities to self-organize across the country and frankly across the world. About 30% of the projects are actually globally. But what I really want to leave you with is that this message of play matters more than ever. This message of purpose over profit really matters more than ever. And we need a renaissance of all types coming from all places. And the first thing all of us need to do is to become more playful in our own lives, become the trendsetter, invite others in to play with us and play along with us, to play in an active and balanced way, and that's how the crowd grows. I thank you for having me. I look forward to answering your questions, and I look forward to seeing you anywhere playing and joining along with you. Thank you very much.